The gas station bathroom reeked of bleach and piss, the flickering fluorescent light above casting Salvador Banks in a nauseous, ghostly glow. He stared at his reflection, 22 years old, cheeks hollow from stress, brown eyes ringed with exhaustion. His father's voice still echoed in his ears, even as the silence outside told a truth louder than words. He yanked open the cracked door and stepped outside into the muggy Mississippi dusk. The gravel crunched beneath his sneakers as he walked to the spot where his family's car had been parked just 10 minutes ago. But the space was empty now. Completely, undeniably empty. His fingers instinctively searched his pockets. No phone, no wallet, no keys. Just the $10 bill he had tucked into his sock earlier for snacks, the same way a prisoner hides hope. He waited, at first thinking it was a cruel joke. His father Banks was good at those. Salvador could already hear Alan, his younger brother, snickering from the back seat, saying, "Come on, man, it was just a prank." But 5 minutes passed. Then 15. Then 40. The sun dipped low behind the cypress trees, casting long shadows across the lot. The chirp of insects rose around him like a symphony of mockery. And, still, nothing. That was the moment Salvador realized he'd been left. Intentionally. Like trash someone couldn't find the energy to dispose of properly. And that was also the moment he decided he was never going back. The last time Salvador had truly laughed in his family's presence, he was 11. It was a winter evening in their Memphis home, and he had helped his mom bake cinnamon rolls from scratch. For a moment, things had felt normal. But the sound of his father's boots on the kitchen tile had ended the warmth as quickly as it began. "Why is he in here laughing like a girl?" Banks had grunted, tossing his keys on the table with a hard clink. "You need to toughen up, boy. You ain't gonna make it in this world giggling over dough." That had been the first time Salvador learned that in his house, joy was dangerous. Now, a decade later, those words echoed as he sat on a faded bench outside that rest stop, mosquitoes biting his ankles and dusk swallowing the last trace of sun. He thought about how everything that happened to him on this trip had been years in the making. The drive to Alabama was supposed to be a family road trip. His cousin Delilah was getting married in Birmingham, and Salvador had reluctantly agreed to come. He'd taken a few days off from his part-time job, packed a small bag, and joined his parents and younger brother Alan in Banks' old black Chevy Tahoe. Alan, with his perpetual smirk and fake charm, spent the entire ride alternating between TikTok videos and smug little digs at Salvador's life. "Still washing dishes, huh?" he had said from the back seat. "Maybe you can help out at the wedding, scrub the buffet trays or something." Salvador said nothing. That had always been the safest option, silence. But this time, something in him began to crack. Banks, gripping the wheel too tightly, added his usual 2 cents. "A man your age should already be planning to move out. Alan's already got offers to intern at a firm in Atlanta. You, meanwhile, still living under my roof, eating my food." "I pay rent," Salvador muttered. "What was that?" Banks barked. "I said I pay rent. You told me $400 a month and I've paid it. On time. Every month." The silence that followed was thick with insult. His mother, Gloria, shifted awkwardly in her seat, pretending not to hear. She always did that. Pretended not to see, not to hear. Especially when Salvador was the target. Alan laughed softly. "Man, got a little backbone now." The car stopped for gas just outside of Montgomery. Salvador went into the rest stop bathroom to splash cold water on his face and gather his breath. By the time he stepped out, the Tahoe was gone. No call. No text. Just gone. At first, he thought maybe they'd pulled around the corner. Maybe Banks was just trying to teach him a lesson. But the lesson was far crueler than he expected. They weren't coming back. Salvador sat on the bench until the insects quieted and the neon gas station sign buzzed into the darkness. He watched family after family come and go, mothers adjusting their children's jackets, fathers carrying sleeping toddlers back to their cars. Warmth. Care. The very things he had been denied. He tried the gas station attendant for help, but the man, a young guy named Chris with dreadlocks and bloodshot eyes, simply shrugged. You ain't got no phone? Damn. That's rough, bruh. Chris gave him a bottle of water and pointed to a back alley near the dumpsters. You can crash there for a bit, but the manager shows up at 6. He don't like loiterers. And that was how Salvador spent his first night abandoned, curled on a piece of cardboard behind a convenience store dumpster with no pillow but his own backpack and no music but the hum of generators and the ache of his own thoughts. The next morning, something strange happened. As he dusted himself off, ready to figure out a way to get back home, despite his pride, a white truck pulled up next to the dumpster alley. Out stepped an older black woman in a sunflower print dress and a red apron that read, Geraldine's Grub, where soul is served hot. She looked him over, then nodded once. You hungry, baby? Salvador blinked, not trusting her at first. But the way she said it, it wasn't pity. It was something deeper, like recognition. He nodded. She handed him a wrapped foil plate and didn't ask questions. Come by Sonny's later. Ask for me. Then she got back into her truck and drove off, leaving him with something far more valuable than food, a lifeline. That day, as the sun rose over the low Alabama trees, Salvador made a decision. Not just to survive, but to never, ever let the people who abandoned him write the rest of his story. They had left him at a gas station, but he would build a future that no one could ever walk away from again. The first bite of Geraldine's food was enough to make Salvador forget, just for a moment, that he was sleeping behind a dumpster. The grits were creamy and still warm, the eggs fluffy with a touch of cheese, and the cornbread. Oh, the cornbread was thick, sweet, and buttery enough to make him close his eyes as he chewed. He ate slowly, savoring each bite like it might be his last, using the foil as a makeshift plate while sitting on an overturned milk crate. It had been 24 hours since he was abandoned. The sun rose heavy and humid again, casting a soft amber light over the side of the convenience store. The world was still moving, uncaring and unaware of the fact that someone's entire life had just been shattered. He kept telling himself he should find a way back to Memphis, that he should borrow someone's phone and call someone, maybe a friend from work, maybe his manager at the car wash. But each time he pictured Banks' face, or Alan's smug laughter, he stopped cold. Why return to a house that never felt like home? Why crawl back to people who made it clear that he was disposable? That afternoon, Salvador made his way to Sonny's diner, as instructed. The building was small and square, its white walls faded with age, but the windows were bright and clean. The air smelled of frying bacon and cinnamon, and a hand-painted sign above the door read, Sonny's, food for the soul, served with grace. Inside, ceiling fans stirred the hot air slowly, gospel music played low from an old speaker in the corner, and the booths were filled with regulars sipping coffee and chatting like family. It felt like a different world, warm, grounded, and real. Behind the counter stood Geraldine. Her hair was pulled up under a wrap, her dark skin glowing with the kind of grace earned through years of hard work and not giving up. She was wiping down a plate when she saw him enter. Took you long enough, she said, without looking up. I didn't want to come off desperate, Salvador said quietly, unsure of his voice. You are, she replied, still not looking. But that's okay. Desperate men become determined men. You just gotta pick which one you gonna be. She finally turned to him and nodded toward the back kitchen. You ever washed dishes before? Yes, ma'am. Good. Because I hate washing dishes, and my busboy just ran off with a waitress from Mobile. Start today, you eat after your shift. Pays not much at first, but it's a start. Salvador blinked. You're serious? I don't joke about work, she said, handing him an apron. By nightfall, his arms ached and his back screamed. He had washed what felt like 1,000 plates, learned how to change the grease trap, took out 4 bags of trash, and somehow managed not to slip on the constantly wet kitchen floor. But when Geraldine handed him a styrofoam container filled with fried catfish, yams, and mac and cheese and added an extra cornbread just because he almost cried. "You got somewhere to sleep?" she asked as she sat across from him in the corner booth. "Not exactly," Salvador said. She looked him over again, this time slower, more thoughtful. "You ain't the first to come through here broken, baby. You won't be the last." She reached into her purse and pulled out a single key on a string. "My brother owns an old garage out back. There's a loft above it with a cot. Not fancy. No hot water. But it's got a roof and a door that locks. Rent's helping me with this place and staying out of trouble." Salvador took the key in his hands like it was made of gold. "You can't save everybody," he whispered, voice low. Geraldine smiled. "Maybe not. But I can start with one." That night, Salvador climbed the creaky stairs to the loft above the garage and looked out the tiny window facing the back alley. The moon hung low and full, casting silver light over everything below. He could still smell the faint scent of grease and sugar on his clothes. He lay on the cot and stared at the ceiling, his body aching but his heart oddly still. He had nothing. No family, no car, no home. But somehow, for the first time in his life, he felt like the ground beneath him wasn't trying to collapse. And that was everything. 3 months into his new life, Salvador still woke up before sunrise, not out of habit, but out of fear. Fear that it had all been a dream, that he'd open his eyes and find himself back in his father's house, walls stained with resentment, voices sharpened like knives, and the constant dread of being unwanted. But every morning, he was greeted by the same sight: wooden beams above his head, a rickety fan that hummed a lopsided tune, and sunlight creeping through the dirty window of Geraldine's garage loft. And that meant he was still free. At Sonny's, Salvador wasn't just the dishwasher anymore. Geraldine had taught him how to prep food, how to chop onions fast without crying, how to make her secret collard greens with smoked turkey neck, and how to flip pancakes without burning one side. She didn't give compliments easily, but one night after the rush, she said, "Your grits ain't bad." That was high praise. He kept his head down and his heart open. When Geraldine asked about his family, he gave her the short version. "They left me." And she never pressed. Instead, she gave him something better than sympathy, trust. She handed him the keys to open the diner when she had to go to her sister's doctor appointments. She let him count the register under her supervision. She even taught him how to talk to suppliers without sounding like a fool. "You got a brain, baby. Just ain't nobody ever gave you the room to stretch it." One rainy Tuesday afternoon, as thunder rolled low in the sky, Salvador was mopping near the front when the door opened and a group of college students came in, drenched and loud, shaking off their jackets and laughing. That was the first time he saw Kendra. She was the only one not laughing. She was trying to keep her hair dry under a blue umbrella, holding a thick med school textbook against her chest, and scanning the room like she didn't want to be there. She had sharp eyes and full lips, and when she finally met Salvador's gaze, it wasn't flirtation that passed between them, it was curiosity. He turned away quickly and resumed mopping. Later that evening, while clearing their table, he found her number written on a napkin next to a half-eaten peach cobbler. "I see you. Call me sometime. Kendra." He stared at the napkin for 5 full minutes before slipping it into his pocket like it was a secret treasure. Their first date was clumsy. He wore a shirt one size too big and met her at a local bookstore cafe. He expected her to back out once she found out about the loft, the job, the past. But Kendra wasn't like that. "You're honest," she said, sipping her tea. "That's rare. But I'm not impressive," he replied. "I'm not looking to be impressed," she shrugged. "I'm looking to feel safe." Those words echoed in his chest for days. As seasons shifted and his hands became steadier in the kitchen, so did his place in the community. Geraldine introduced him as "my boy" to regulars. People brought him shoes, winter coats, books. He saved every dollar not spent on food or bills, and with Geraldine's guidance, he began taking online courses in restaurant management. Don't just learn how to work, she told him one night. Learn how to lead. He listened. Because when someone finally believes in you, you don't waste that belief. By the end of his second year in Montgomery, Salvador had taken over operations at Sunny's 3 days a week. Geraldine was easing toward retirement, and one night over lemon pound cake, she said, I want to open a second spot. And I want you to run it. He almost dropped his fork. Me? You, she confirmed. Eyes serious. You earned it. Don't let your past talk you out of your future. That night, Salvador stood outside the garage and cried quietly under the stars. Not from pain, but from possibility. The grand opening of Sunny South was more than just a new beginning for Salvador. It was the ultimate proof that broken people didn't have to stay broken. The location was on the edge of town, near a community college and an old grocery store that had been turned into a thrift market. It wasn't glamorous, but Geraldine had always said, we don't need fancy. We need familiar. And Salvador understood that now more than ever. He painted the walls himself, warm honey yellow, just like the original diner. He built the chalkboard menu by hand, screwing in each plank, smudging the blackboard ink with his sleeves. And when the neon sign finally lit up at dusk, reading, Sunny South, a taste of grace, he stood on the sidewalk for 10 full minutes, arms folded, watching it glow. It didn't feel real, but it was. Kendra was there for the opening day, holding his hand as customers lined up. By then, they were more than just two people who met on a rainy day. They were partners emotionally, spiritually, and soon, legally. He proposed to her the following spring, on the same bench outside the bookstore where they had their first date. He had no ring yet, just a promise sealed with tears and truth. She said yes before he finished the question. They married in a simple backyard ceremony. Geraldine gave him away like a mother would, dabbing her eyes as she said, I didn't birth you, but I sure as hell helped raise you. The staff from both Sunny's locations cooked for the reception. Salvador wore a second-hand suit. Kendra wore a white sundress with her hair pinned up in gold combs. It was perfect. Not because it was expensive or luxurious, but because everyone in that space loved him for who he was. Not who he used to be. Not who he could be useful to, but who he chose to become. Marriage changed Salvador in quiet ways. He learned to be still, to listen, to accept love without suspicion. For years, he'd known only conditional affection. But Kendra gave hers freely. When she cooked, she left out onions because he hated them. When he was quiet too long, she held his hand without questions. When he had nightmares a rare now, but still lingering, she turned on a lamp and whispered, You're safe. You're here. You're mine. They rented a small brick home with a fenced backyard and a lemon tree out front. Geraldine retired officially and passed him full control of both diners. And when Kendra placed a tiny pair of baby shoes on the kitchen table one Sunday morning, smiling nervously, Salvador fell to his knees and wept. He didn't cry because he was afraid. He cried because for the first time in his life, he had something to lose. He built the nursery with his own hands, choosing seafoam green for the walls and stenciling clouds above the crib. He read baby books between managing payroll and scheduling kitchen shifts. He talked to his unborn daughter every night, placing his hand on Kendra's belly and whispering promises, You'll never feel abandoned. You'll never wonder if you're enough. I swear. When baby Naomi Grace was born, Salvador held her close against his chest and knew, in the deepest part of his soul, that this was the family he was meant for. The kind you make, not the kind you're born into. But the past has a way of circling back when you least expect it. One late afternoon, as the dinner rush began to settle and Salvador wiped down the counter, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It read, Sal, it's Dad. We need to talk. It's about your mother. Please. The text sat on his screen like a live wire. The past was calling. But this time, Salvador would choose how to answer. The message lingered in Salvador's mind for days. Not because he missed them, but because the wording was so familiar. It's about your mother. They'd always used her as a shield, as a smokescreen, as the one person who could pull Salvador back into the fire he'd crawled so hard to escape. But Kendra knew something was wrong the moment she saw him standing in the kitchen at 2 a.m., staring out the window with his fists clenched. "Did someone die?" she asked gently. He shook his head. "Not yet." She said nothing, just walked over and wrapped her arms around him. "Whatever it is," she whispered, "we face it together." By the time he replied to the text, 3 days had passed. His message was short. "What do you want?" The reply came within minutes. "We're struggling. Mom's sick. Alan's drinking again. We need help. Please, Sal." He stared at the word Sal. They used to spit that nickname at him like an insult. Now it was a plea. Kendra sat beside him as he read it aloud. "Do you think they've changed?" she asked. "No," Salvador said. "But I have." He agreed to meet them. Not at his home. Not near Kendra or Naomi or anything sacred. He picked the original Sunnies. His space. His rules. When he told Geraldine, she pursed her lips and said, "You sure?" "I need to see them," he said, "to make peace with the part of me that used to need them." The evening was heavy with rain clouds and quiet tension. Salvador arrived early and sat at the booth in the far corner, half in shadow, facing the door. The same booth where he used to polish silverware when he first started. The door jingled, and in walked his past. Banks had aged in a way that wasn't just physical, it was spiritual. His shoulders slumped, his skin sallow. He looked like a man who'd been clawing his way out of a bad deal for years. Alan followed behind, gaunt and twitchy, eyes bloodshot, smelling faintly of stale alcohol. Their mother, Ruth, walked in last, thinner than he remembered, her face pale and tired, wrapped in a scarf. Her hands trembled slightly as she clutched her purse. "Salvador," she breathed, her voice cracking like brittle paper. He nodded once. They sat. The silence was thick, broken only by the hum of the ceiling fan and the distant clatter of plates in the kitchen. "We didn't know where you were," Ruth said. "You knew," Salvador replied calmly. "You just didn't care. We were worried sick. You left me at a rest stop with no phone, no money, no goodbye. I was 22. Banks shifted uncomfortably. "We didn't think you'd disappear." Salvador let out a bitter laugh. "What did you think I'd do? Follow you back like a stray dog?" "We made a mistake," Ruth said, voice wavering. "We were overwhelmed. Alan was struggling and your father's business was." "Don't," Salvador said sharply. "Don't make this about Alan or your business. This isn't an apology. This is a begging session." Alan slammed his hand against the table. "You think you're better than us now? With your stupid diner and your pretty little life?" "No," Salvador said. "I know I am." The room stilled. Then Salvador reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a check. He slid it across the table. "It's for the exact amount it would have cost to get me home the day you left me," he said. "Bus fare. 1 meal. Motel for 1 night." Banks stared at the check. "What the hell is this supposed to mean?" "It means you don't owe me. And I sure as hell don't owe you." "You're heartless," Ruth whispered, tears brimming. "No," Salvador said gently. "I just finally stopped bleeding for people who wouldn't even offer a bandage." He stood. "You abandoned me once. I forgave you in silence. I built a life in your absence. And now you're here, not because you love me, but because you're sinking." He looked them over one last time. "You'll have to learn how to swim." "I did." He turned and walked out of the diner without looking back. Outside, the rain had started, cool and refreshing. Kendra's car was waiting across the lot. As he stepped inside, she reached over and kissed his temple. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded slowly. "Yeah." And for the first time in years, he actually meant it. Months passed after that final dinner with his parents, and they never reached out again. Not for holidays. Not for birthdays. Not even when Naomi turned 2 and her photo went viral after Kendra posted it, grinning with a milk mustache and her hair in tiny puffs. But Salvador wasn't waiting for that call anymore. He had already buried the boy who needed their love. What lived now was a man, a husband, a father, a community builder. A man who had clawed his way from nothing to everything that truly mattered. Sunny South became more than a diner. It became a sanctuary. Young people with broken homes came through those doors looking for work, and Salvador offered them something greater, dignity. He trained them in the kitchen, taught them how to balance a budget, how to speak to customers, how to hold their heads up even on the hardest days. One of them, a girl named Rochelle, reminded him of himself at 22, quiet, guarded, always looking over her shoulder. But after a year at Sunny's, she laughed more, stayed late to mop floors without being asked, and even started taking night classes. "I don't have a family," she once said. "You do now," Salvador replied. And he meant it. At home, things only got sweeter. Kendra finished her residency and opened her own clinic right next to the diner. They became something of a power couple in the community, though they never called themselves that. They just showed up every day for the people who needed them. Hi besties, thank you so much for watching to the end. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. Bye.